cozy games kind of feel like a pretty modern thing, don't they? Well, while the current mainstays of the cozy genre may indeed be pretty unique to our modern gaming landscape, cozy games are nothing new. There have always been cozy games, they just looked a little bit different than we might be used to today. Welcome to the channel for those of you who are new here, and welcome back to those of you who are returning. My name is Nick, and I make videos about things I'm interested in. Today, that's cozy retro games. So without any further delay, let's get right into it. So, cozy games. Today, they're pretty universally recognized as games that are low-key, chill, not too intense, and usually farming-based. Now, my personal feelings on that definition aside, that's a pretty accurate representation of the games in this space. These games are not going for a feeling of mastery over the in-game world, and they don't want to give you the feeling of domination and control over others that many mainstream games hinge their gameplay on. Now, to be clear, I don't actually think that kind of a gameplay is necessarily bad. I love a good Elden Ring or the like every now and then, and when I'm in the mood, I love to feel the sense of mastery that I can get from games like that. But I do find that to be, most of the time, the exception rather than the rule. I generally find that when I want to play a game, I would prefer to sit down and get absorbed in a world that I kind of just want to exist in, not one that I want to try to fix or change. I want that world to be chill, generally happy, and if there's any conflict, I want it to be rather low stakes. Basically, I want the game not to take itself too seriously, and many people may call what I just described little kiddie games, or perhaps less charitably, little baby games, and frankly, I think that would be a pretty apt description. But, you know what genre of game has a practically endless list of kiddie games? That's right, you guessed it, retro games. Now, I don't think I would be alone in the assertion that back in the day, Nintendo basically had the market cornered when it came to these early cozy games. I mean, their main audience was literally children, so their games were specifically made to be easy to digest, simple mechanically, and not too serious in their narrative. And of course, this was informed by the technical limitations of the time, but it was also absolutely a deliberate creative decision, and frankly, a really business-savvy one too. It's one Apple and Google have both taken notes from in their school laptop/iPad programs. The earlier in life you can get your product in front of someone, the more likely they'll be to just instinctively choose that product instead of a competitor. But back to the games. Retro Nintendo games, aside from being some of the most popular and memorable retro games of all time, also have the unique distinction of basically being the primordial cozy games. I mean, you would be hard-pressed to find a popular cozy game today that didn't at least get some kind of inspiration from one retro Nintendo game or the other. And so, that is what we're going to be taking a look at today. And though I won't deliberately limit myself to Nintendo games, they do generally appeal to me more, so there will likely be a heavy emphasis on Nintendo titles in this video. But just know that there are countless titles out there, so don't just limit yourself to the games that I mentioned here. If you're already very familiar with retro gaming and emulation and all of that stuff, feel free to skip to the next chapter for just the games. I'm going to be going over some of the more beginner information in this section. And if you're not already familiar with retro games, stick around because this is info you're probably going to want to know. I'm going to try to make this video applicable to those of you who are new to retro games, so think of this as more of a stepping off point rather than a complete list or anything like that. I'll try to give you some good beginner games that I think might get you interested in the hobby and might be a good place to start if you've never considered diving back into the retro catalog. Also, because we're talking about retro games, I should address the elephant in the room: emulation. Now, there have been a number of pretty huge changes to the legal standing of emulation recently, and Nintendo seems to be cracking down more than ever when it comes to their IP. So I think it's probably a good idea to just tell you right up front, emulation is in a bit of a legal gray area right now, and while single users like you are pretty safe overall, this whole legal shadow looming over the whole thing makes certain aspects a bit more difficult to access than might be ideal. And while, again, individual users like you and me are probably safe from Nintendo's lawyers, I should state that playing ROMs that you don't own is absolutely against the law. So because of that, I can't tell you where to get ROMs online, as that would be decidedly illegal. However, ripping the ROMs yourself and playing them on an emulator is arguably perfectly fine and totally within your rights. So, I'm going to go forward with the assumption that you understand in order to play any of these games, you need to either play them on the Switch with the retro games library there, or buy the original cartridge and rip the ROM from that in order to play on whatever emulator that you own. Okay, good? We're all on the same page? Awesome. Now, the last piece of housekeeping before we get to the actual games is what to play them on. As I mentioned earlier, emulation is the way to go for basically everybody. Unless you still have your original hardware and everything required to play it, you're going to want to use an emulator so you can simply play your legally obtained ROMs on your PC, phone, or dedicated handheld. I would highly recommend starting with your phone because it's totally free, but you should check out Retro Game Core or Wolfden for their recommendations on dedicated handhelds if you're in the market for that. My personal recommendation is the RG35XXSP, but your preferences will certainly vary, so you should absolutely go check out those guys for their thoughts. But okay, now with all of that out of the way, we can finally get to the games. So, first up on the list, alright, I'll start with a game that I would consider to be one of the best games ever made, if not the single best game ever made. Tetris. Okay, I know, those are some pretty high expectations that I've set right out the gate. Tetris, the best game ever made? Are you kidding me? The one where you just stack blocks infinitely? How is that the best game ever made with masterpieces like It Takes Two, The Last of Us, Breath of the Wild, Ocarina of Time, and countless others? Well, the answer is simple. That's it. It's simple. And that simplicity is the ace that makes this game so incredibly appealing. But it wouldn't work if it were as simple as stacking 1x1 square blocks. Obviously, that wouldn't provide enough challenge or reward. So it's not just that it's simple, it's more that it's just the right amount of simple. You get just enough challenge to give you that great release when you complete a row, and there's just enough variation so as to not be too overcomplicated, but also not too basic. The gradual speed ramp works great for scaling with your skills as you get more practice, and the fact that the skill ceiling is effectively limitless means as long as your inputs and brain can keep up with the speed of the falling tiles, you can keep playing. But more than all of that, I think what makes Tetris so enduring is the fact that it's 100% on you when you fail. There's no blaming the computer, the rules are always the same, and the only limit is how fast you can think and how precisely you can complete your inputs. But okay, now it's starting to sound like some crazy esport game. We're talking about cozy retro games. This game doesn't sound cozy at all. It sounds stressful as hell, really. And at levels past 11, I would say, yeah, it's getting a bit more on the stressful side. But that's what's so amazing about Tetris. It doesn't matter. None of it matters. You can just quit when it starts feeling too stressful or too hard and start back over from the beginning. And in doing that, you slowly, very slowly, subconsciously get better and better, and you're slowly able to get later and later levels without even really thinking about it. Tetris is probably the absolute peak transit or idle game. It doesn't matter when you end the game, so you can just kind of turn it off when your ride ends, and it's so simple it can be played on literally anything. My personal favorite is probably the Game Boy version on a Game Boy Color. I personally think it's the perfect version of the game. It's stylistically beautiful and mechanically perfect in my eyes. And it's so simple to run, any emulator can handle it with ease. There are newer versions made specifically for smartphones, but in my opinion, those lose the essence of what Tetris is. So if I had to recommend one definitive edition, it would be the Game Boy version on a Game Boy Color. But that's probably enough about Tetris. I don't think it needs me to bolster its reputation. Now, let's talk about a game genre that I don't actually have all that much experience in. And that is turn-based RPGs, with Mother 3/Earthbound 3. Just so you know, these games go by two different names depending on the region, but I'll just use them interchangeably throughout this section to just, I guess, make it more confusing. Mother 3 is a game that a lot of fans of JRPGs absolutely adore. The basic plot of the game is that you play as Lucas. You and your party are trying to gain control of a big dragon so you can get rid of an invading force, who has kind of taken control of the area that you live in and brought the evils of capitalism to your small village and destroyed it in the process. Now again, like I said, I personally don't jive with the gameplay here. I'm just not that interested in turn-based games. I don't know what it is, but it just doesn't work with my brain. I'm going to continue to try to give them a try because I know so many people love them, so clearly I'm just missing something. But I just want to tell you right now that if I say anything negative about this game, it's probably just because it wasn't really made for me or players like me. However, I can absolutely see how this would be a great cozy game for anybody who does like turn-based JRPGs. If you're someone who does love turn-based games and you're looking for one that doesn't have the universe-ending stakes like Final Fantasy has, then this is a great game for you. The real core of this game centers around a group of young children's battle against the encroachment of capitalism on their beloved town. It's a contained experience, and while it certainly does go places, and I wouldn't go so far as to say it's simple and without stakes, those stakes are more down to earth than, like, protecting your world from evil gods and demons and stuff like that. And that small town setting really does help you get that cozy feeling too. It's not as chilled out as something like maybe Stardew, but that's just kind of because it's not really the genre that it was made for. But for the JRPG landscape, it's absolutely on the much more cozy side. Plus, the art is frankly beautiful. The pixel art really has its own personality and a totally unique feel to it. If you've played Undertale and you enjoyed that experience, I think you should absolutely check out the Earthbound/Mother games. So much of that game is made to appeal to fans of Earthbound, so if that was your introduction to this kind of game and you loved that, you owe it to yourself and frankly that game to try out the Mother games. Again, this is a really well-known and popular Nintendo game, so I really don't think it needs me to kind of gas it up, so I'll just leave it here. If you like turn-based JRPGs, but you're looking for a more down-to-earth and cozy vibe, you should absolutely check out the Mother/Earthbound games. Really, any of them. I specifically mentioned 3, but pretty much all of them are the same vibe. But next up, we have That's right, I'm putting Pokémon on here. I'm specifically talking about the Pokémon games, I would say probably up until the DS. I'm not much into the 3D stuff, if I'm honest, and frankly, I think the best showings in the franchise come around the Game Boy Color period. And there's a reason I call out these games in particular. A lot of what makes a game cozy is how it makes you feel, right? Well, for me, and I think a lot of other people, nostalgia is a pretty cozy feeling. And these games, which came out right around the time that I was growing up, even if I didn't actually play them at the time, give me that feeling. And I know nostalgia is a rather contentious thing, and there are very valid reasons for disliking media's over-reliance on nostalgia. For one thing, it can stifle innovation. If you're always looking back, it's hard to move forward. It can also risk only focusing on the good and fun bits of history without looking critically at the environment around those things that kind of allowed them to be that way, and the people that had to be suppressed in order for those systems to work. Suffice it to say, there are plenty of issues with using nostalgia when creating or engaging with a piece of media. However, when striving for a feeling of comfort, nostalgia is an invaluable tool. The thing about it, though, is that nostalgia is different for different people. So for me, Pokemon and the Pokemon games are very nostalgic. The pixel art, the chilled out gameplay, and focus on collection and exploration more than life and death stakes, it all perfectly serves my personal nostalgic taste. However, that is obviously going to be different from what your personal taste is when it comes to that. Maybe the people who bullied you when you were a kid were super into Pokemon. Maybe you played it to escape your daily troubles that you had growing up, so now you associate that game with being in a place that you never want to be again. It's a tricky tool to use, and that's why I struggle to wholeheartedly suggest games based purely on nostalgia. So, aside from that, I think there are slightly more objective reasons why Pokemon should be on this list. For one, I think the pixel art is kind of just inherently cozy. There's something about the low fidelity that allows you the space to not really care too much about the graphical quality. And on top of that, you have the exploration and world building. I love just walking around Pokemon games because I never know what I'm going to find around the next corner. And while there might be some more technically impressive games out there when it comes to exploration, there still isn't anything that quite feels the same to me as the worlds of the Pokemon games. Plus, I mean, come on, who doesn't want to walk around collecting cute little guys and evolving them? I mean, I personally would love to just walk around and collect them. I don't really have any particular need for a combat system, though it is fun in its own right, and if you do like a slight bit more combat, then it's great for infusing the experience with that. While I personally would really love to just walk around and collect a whole bestiary of these little guys, I suspect most people wouldn't really jive with that mechanic. But we're coming up on time for today. I'll go ahead and add a few bonus games here real quick at the end that I think you should absolutely be checking out. And the first is Blockout 2. Blockout 2 is basically just 3D top-down Tetris, and while I did say that most modern reimaginings of Tetris kind of ruin the formula, I think Blockout 2 absolutely nailed it. They do keep the shapes simple enough, but give you the ability to change up the complexity if you want it. I personally think the simple flat shapes are the best to play with, they provide plenty of difficulty, and I think the gradual speed ramp adds plenty on top of that. But if you do want more, they will let you do that. But what I love about it is the fact that it adds a whole new dimension to the game and makes you totally rethink the blocks. Now, a simple straight block that used to have only a couple specific uses has infinitely more, and there are more ways to screw up your stack too. Blockout 2 really makes your brain work, and it's great for us dyslexics because spatial reasoning just kind of hits different with us. Overall, I just really love the way that this game absolutely feels like playing Tetris, just in 3D. Next up is Link's Awakening, and this is probably one of my favorite Zelda games I've ever played. It's the first retro game I fully played through on original hardware, and while it's still certainly a Zelda game, which means it's high fantasy, it has much more close-to-home stakes, and the world it's set in is wacky in all kinds of cool and interesting ways. It's just a really great time, and it's a game I would absolutely love to just huddle up on the couch with a warm cup of coffee and get lost in. The Minish Cap is kind of like Link's Awakening on steroids. I won't go into all the different mechanics here because we could be here for hours, but there is always something to do in this game, and everything revolves around exploration. Honestly, I could put all the Zelda games on here because while they are all usually pretty high stakes, they are specifically designed to make you feel like a little kid exploring a vast and unknown jungle in your backyard. It's a beautiful game and one that I can't recommend higher. Next up on our list is Metroid. Okay, hear me out. I know this is what would become known as a Metroidvania in the ensuing years since its release, and those games are usually known to be pretty intense, but I absolutely don't think that disqualifies it from being considered cozy. Not only is the sci-fi world that it's set in just such a cool one to explore, the sounds of the game take it to a whole nother level. I don't know what it is, but there's just something so undeniably cozy about exploring a damp, dark, abandoned, alien planet in pixel art. And that kind of connects us back to what I was talking about with Pokémon and the Mother games. There's just something about pixel art that can make what should, for all intents and purposes, feel like playing through a horror game, just kind of feel like the perfect companion for a cold, overcast, or rainy autumn day. There are so many retro games out there. So many it nearly killed the games industry once just from the sheer number. And there's so much variety in that too. If you're more into the farming stuff, you got Harvest Moon. If you're more into the arcadey feel, there's stuff like Mario Kart or Pac-Man or any number of really cool retro games. If you're interested in retro stuff, I highly recommend seeing if there's a retro game expo anywhere near you. That is a great way to explore all the different games out there and find something that you like. The only reason that I found Blockout 2 was because my suegros took me to one near where I live. If you love games, I really do believe that learning about their history is such an important and interesting thing to do. Knowing where the things that you love come from and why they are the way they are is just so important. But anyway, I'll let you go now. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you try any of these games that I mentioned, or maybe you have a recommendation that I missed, please leave a comment. It's always way more helpful than you probably realize. Other than that though, hey, Future Nick here. I just recently enabled memberships on the channel after I had already shot this whole video that you're watching right now. And so I just want to let you know, those are available now. If you want to sign up, there's 2 tiers. I made them exactly the same in terms of what you actually get. So just sign up for whatever makes the most sense for you. Or don't. You also don't have to. Just you watching the videos is more than enough for me. This is really just for if you want to throw a little bit more support my way, a little bit extra to kind of help make the channel a little bit more sustainable for me monetarily. Yeah, that's it. I just wanted to add that in here right before the outro. So I'll let you get back to that now. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a video. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, happy gaming.